Well, hello there! Today is a very different episode as I am going to rank the United States. I am going to be doing a tier list, which was a trend many years ago, so I'm just hopping on it now. I am going to rank the states from S tier, which is the highest tier, to F tier, which is the worst tier. I do want to preface that I love all the states and they all have something interesting and unique to visit. However, I am going to try to have a bell curve with this. If you've never seen my videos before, I travel around the United States as well as Europe filming museums, historic locations, roadside attractions, national parks, and much more. I have definitely not been to every state. However, I do think I am knowledgeable enough to rank the states. I will count that I have been to 29 states. I went to a few others when I was younger, but I'm not going to count those. Although as I continue to visit all of them, that ranking may change in the future. I am interested in the travel potential of each state. This is not a political or economic ranking. I am purely looking at what each state has to offer, both in the quantity and quality of attractions. So let's go take a look at the list. Alright, so here is the tier list. I'm going to be ranking each of these states and I'll try to keep it brief, but there's a lot to talk about. Also, as I discuss each state, I will be using my map of the top attractions in the United States. Yes, this is just what I consider to be the top attractions. This is on a site called Scribble Maps. I've had this map for a long time, and there's a link to this in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. So let's dive right into this, and actually the first state is Indiana. Now this is Hoosier Tours, and I am a native Hoosier. I've spent the most time in Indiana out of all the states, as I am originally from Indiana and still spend a lot of time there. I promise you that there is indeed more than corn in Indiana. First of all, Indianapolis is really cool. I definitely want to do more videos here. There's some great war memorials and museums. There's also an interesting literary history here with James Whitcomb Riley and Kurt Vonnegut. Indiana has 3 national park sites, those being the Indiana Dunes on Lake Michigan, Abraham Lincoln's boyhood home, as well as the George Rogers Clark Memorial in Vincennes, which is quite an interesting place to visit. Along with that, there are many great museums and state parks around the state, like Turkey Run, Brown County, Clifty Falls, and historic Madison. Auburn, Indiana, and its automotive history is really interesting, as is French Lick, Indiana. There are even a couple theme parks like Holiday World and Santa Claus, Indiana, as well as Indiana Beach, which I need to get to. So with that said, I think it's fair to place Indiana as a B-tier state. I mean that with all due respect, please visit Indiana. Alright, our second state is probably the most unique state, that being Hawaii. I have never been to this outlying state. From what I can tell, it is quite expensive to visit and difficult to get around as it's a series of several islands. But regardless, it contains some of the most beautiful and majestic places in the United States. The state capital of Honolulu looks pretty awesome, with the only royal palace in the US, the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, there's Diamond Head, and of course Pearl Harbor. The Hana Highway on Maui looks awesome. Actually, Charles Lindbergh is buried alongside it. There's also Haleakala National Park, and of course the Hawaii volcanoes. While it is completely different from the rest of the states, it is isolated and difficult to get to. It'll probably be a while before I can get there, so I'm going to put Hawaii at B tier. Oh boy, I don't know how to talk briefly about California here. Attraction-wise, California is probably the best state. There is so much to do across this ginormous expanse of land. Alright, where do we begin? Let's start in Los Angeles, a sprawling metropolis with Hollywood, all sorts of museums, including some great art museums like the Getty. I'm very excited for the upcoming Lucas Museum of Narrative Art coming to Exposition Park. Don't forget the Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan presidential libraries. Up north, San Francisco and the whole Bay Area looks fantastic. Of course, there's great icons like the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz Prison, there's the Fisherman's Wharf with some interesting attractions, especially Musée Mécanique, I'd love to go there. Another major city is San Diego, and this is actually the only place I have ever been to in California. I have some videos that will be coming eventually, but the USS Midway was awesome, as is Balboa Park. The San Diego Zoo is my favorite zoo. All around California there are historic missions. There's Hearst Castle, great cities like Santa Barbara and Monterey. Additionally, the state capital of Sacramento has places like Old Town and the Railroad Museum. California is also home to some of the greatest national parks in the country, like Yosemite, Lassen Volcanic National Park, the Redwoods. I would love to go to Sequoia Kings Canyon, In the southern part of the state, there are deserts like Death Valley, Joshua Tree, the Anza Borrego Desert. The Salton Sea area actually looks really interesting to me, especially Salvation Mountain. Some of the best roadside attractions are spread across California. But we can't forget about the historic theme parks, especially Disneyland. That's probably the place I want to go to the most right now. There's also Knott's Berry Farm and Universal Studios Hollywood. So I cannot place California anywhere but S tier. Now on to the other non-contiguous state, Alaska. Being way up here, Alaska is the largest state, but also probably the most desolate. A lot of the same problems as Hawaii, kinda difficult and expensive to visit. So yeah, I have not been here before, but I would definitely like to come here, especially to go up to Barrow and hopefully not end up like Will Rogers. Alaska actually has 8 national parks: Denali, the Kenai Fjords, Wrangell St. Elias, Kobuk Valley, Glacier Bay, Lake Clark, the Gates of the Arctic, and Katmai. Some cities like Anchorage and Fairbanks look pretty cool. And there are a lot of very distinctive attractions, like the Santa Claus house at the North Pole in Alaska. Down here there's some mining history in Skagway. There's also fascinating indigenous culture, especially at Sitka National Historical Park. Now this will probably change once I go there, but for now, I'm putting Alaska as a D. Now we're heading to the deep south with Sweet Home, Alabama. I've never been to Alabama, but there's some interesting history, so I'd very much like to go. Of course, there are some neat cities like Birmingham and the capital of Montgomery, which has some varied historic sites. Mobile looks great with the USS Alabama. Of course, Alabama has a lot of civil rights history. Along with that, there are some great attractions like the US Space and Rocket Center, the Ave Maria Grotto. The American Village in Montevallo looks really interesting. Alabama also has some national park sites like the Little River Canyon and Russell Cave, so I think I'll put Alabama as the first C-tier state. Contrary to popular belief, there are some good things about the state. Now we're moving on to one of my favorites, Arizona. I have been to Arizona a few times, but I've only ever been to the northeast part of the state. So of course that's the Grand Canyon, which I think automatically puts Arizona an A for me. I've also been to Page and Antelope Canyon. I have also been to Petrified Forest National Park and done this stretch of Route 66. Holbrook especially has some fantastic roadside charm. There are many great Puebloan sites all across the state, from Canyon de Chelly to the Montezuma Castle, which is somewhere in here. Phoenix is quite the place despite the heat. Some of the places that look most interesting to me are the Musical Instrument Museum and Taliesin West in Scottsdale, as well as Apache Junction and the Superstition Mountains. Farther south, Tucson, Arizona looks really awesome, with the Pima Air and Space Museum. There's also Saguaro National Park, which is spread in 2 different locations. Arizona has many other interesting locations, such as Tombstone especially, and also I'd love to go to Sedona. There's some majestic scenery there. So Arizona is an A for me. What an awesome place. On to another great western state, Colorado. I have been to Colorado quite a few times, especially here in the Durango Mesa Verde area. The Rocky Mountain terrain of much of Colorado makes it a truly magnificent place. I guess we'll start in Denver. I haven't done too much here. I went to Meow Wolf Convergence Station, which is pretty cool. Also, I saw that Casa Bonita finally reopened, so very excited about that. I saw a concert at Red Rocks Park and Amphitheater. That was awesome. And the Buckhorn Exchange is one of my top 2 favorite restaurants. One city I have not been to is Colorado Springs, which also has tons to do. They have the Air Force Academy, the Garden of the Gods. There's Pikes Peak and Manitou Springs, which is an old-time tourist town. Colorado, no surprise, has several national parks, like Rocky Mountain, which I have not been to. There's also the Great Sand Dunes in the south. As I mentioned, I've been to Mesa Verde a few times. Absolutely fantastic history. And also, Black Canyon of the Gunnison is underrated. There are also lots of interesting roadside attractions across the state. I definitely have a lot more to do here. With all that said, Colorado is an easy A for me. Next up is Delaware. Despite being the first state, to be honest, there's not a lot to do there. Wilmington has some mansions which look pretty cool. There's the Air Mobility Command Museum in Dover. The Rehoboth Beach Boardwalk does look fun. Delaware will probably be getting a Joe Biden presidential library sometime soon, but that may make some of you agree with my decision even more, that Delaware is definitely an F tier. Next up is another historic but very small East Coast state, Connecticut. I have also not been to Connecticut. There are a lot of important historic sites here, especially in Hartford. Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe lived here. You know, there's Yale. The hamburger was supposedly invented there. Mystic Seaport is intriguing, as is the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport. P.T. Barnum was from here. But I think the best I can give Connecticut is a D. Oh yes, now it is time to place Florida. Florida is one of the most wonderful states in the Union. I have been to Florida about every year of my life, although it's been a couple years now. And yeah, clearly there is tons to do. The Orlando area has some great attractions, like Gatorland, which I have not been to. And let's go ahead and talk about the theme parks. There's Universal Studios, which I have been to. I really like that and would like to go back. But down here is one of my favorite places on Earth, Walt Disney World. Such great and unique theme parks like Epcot and Animal Kingdom. I do have some videos on these if you want to check them out. There's also the Kennedy Space Center over here. Haven't been to that. One of the unequivocal highlights of Florida is one of America's first cities, St. Augustine. I did go to St. Augustine and we'll have some videos on that coming soon. Unbelievably awesome attractions like the Castillo de San Marcos, the Littner Museum. There's lots of old-time roadside attractions like Ripley's and Ponce de Leon's Fountain of Youth. The Tampa Bay area also has a lot to offer. And St. Pete is really cool with the Salvador Dali Museum. The Ringling Museum in Sarasota is up there among my favorite museums. Down in Miami, there's also lots to do, like Vizcaya and the Coral Castle. There's also the Keys. I did go to Key West very briefly when I was young, literally for like 4 hours, where I went to the Ernest Hemingway house. But man, I'd love to go back there. Another very unique site is Fort Jefferson, Dry Tortugas National Park. Up here past the Everglades is the Fort Myers area. This is where I've been the most. Growing up, my family would usually go to Fort Myers Beach, so that was a lot of fun. And I definitely hope this area recovers after the hurricane. Florida has some one-of-a-kind roadside attractions like Silver Springs, Weeki Wachee Springs, Boyette's Grove, and the President's Hall of Fame. I freaking love Florida, so this is definitely an S tier. Florida's neighbor, Georgia, is surprisingly awesome as well. So here's a map of the southern states. I haven't done too much yet. Georgia is barely home to one of my favorite all-time attractions, Rock City. I've also been down to the Chickamauga Battlefield, Cloudland Canyon State Park, and Howard Finster's Paradise Garden. I have also been to the opposite corner of the state, at the Okefenokee Swamp Park, which is really neat. Georgia is home to the great metropolis of Atlanta, which has some great museums like the Atlanta History Center, Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site. There's also Stone Mountain, which is quite controversial. Now let's march on through Georgia to the sea at Savannah. From what I've heard, this is a beautiful historic city. The Georgia coast has some other sites of interest, like Jekyll Island and Cumberland Island. There's lots of important historic sites, like Andersonville, Jimmy Carter's home in Plains. The National Infantry Museum is in Columbus. FDR died in Georgia. There's Kennesaw Mountain, New Dakota. The North Georgia mountains are really cool. So yeah, I think I'm going to give Georgia an A. That probably comes as a surprise. Alright, now let's take a look at Maryland with the I Got Crabs in Maryland icon. Now I have not been to Maryland, but I hope to go quite soon actually, though not to get crabs. There's a lot of places with historic significance in Maryland. Baltimore is home to Fort McHenry, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum, Edgar Allan Poe sites, as well as some important art collections. The state capital of Annapolis is home to the Naval Academy. Maryland has a little sliver of coastline, home to Ocean City. There's a dark ride there I'd love to go to. There are several Civil War related sites, most importantly, Antietam. There's also the Monocacy Battlefield near Frederick. Maryland does have a lot of spots I would like to visit. I will put it as a C tier. Next up is Idaho. I have spent a lot of time growing up in Idaho. I absolutely adore the state. So here on the map you can see things are very spread out. I've never really been anywhere in western Idaho in this whole area. So Boise, the state capital, has some good stuff. There's Hell's Canyon. Coeur d'Alene is supposedly very nice. The mining town of Wallace seems interesting. But like I said, I'm more so familiar with the eastern section of the state. Teton Valley, Idaho is beautiful. I definitely recommend going there. This area is really interesting with the Craters of the Moon National Monument. There's EBR-1, one of the oldest nuclear reactors. The Idaho Potato Museum. The Museum of Clean is a hidden gem. I also really like Sun Valley, which is where Ernest Hemingway stayed and later lived out the rest of his life. So I really do like Idaho, but I think I'm gonna have to put it as a C-tier state. Sorry, Idaho. Let's go back to the good old Midwest with Illinois. Illinois is pretty dope, not gonna lie. I have visited many areas of the state many times. First things first, Chicago. This city has a fantastic architectural heritage. The Art Institute of Chicago is one of the best art museums in the world. There's also the Field Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry, among many other interesting locations. Now if we head down Route 66 a ways to the state capital of Springfield, which was home to Abraham Lincoln. I've done a whole big series on this city. The Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum is fantastic. Illinois is home to several other presidential historic sites, including Ronald Reagan's boyhood home and Ulysses S. Grant's home in Galena. Some of my other favorite museums are located in Illinois, such as Historic Auto Attractions. That place is freaking phenomenal, as is the Volo Auto Museum, which is not too far away. Illinois has some surprisingly great state parks like Starved Rock, and there's also the Cahokia Mounds. Honestly, I think Illinois is definitely an A-tier state. Let's take a look at Arkansas. So in comparison to other states, Arkansas does not have all that much. Little Rock has the Bill Clinton Presidential Library. Probably the highlight of Arkansas is Hot Springs, home of Hot Springs National Park and several other weird roadside attractions. Though the northwest corner of the state is probably the most intriguing area, where they have the Christ of the Ozarks and the Great Passion Play. Since I have been to Oberammergau in Germany, I probably gotta go see this one. Then over here in Bentonville, the birthplace of Walmart, there's the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, which I would definitely like to go to. They just had a Diego Rivera exhibit that I'm very sad I missed. So I have been to Arkansas once, and amongst a few small spots, I visited Petit Jean State Park, which is a fantastic natural wonder. There's some other great natural scenery in the Ozarks as well that I have not gotten to yet. All that aside, I am going to put Arkansas in the D category. Another state that doesn't get a whole lot of love is Iowa. This Midwestern state does have some things worth visiting. The only places I have really been to in Iowa is the Buffalo Bill Museum in LeClaire and the Fenelon Place Elevator in Dubuque. But there is a lot more, from Herbert Hoover National Historic Sites to the Matchstick Marvels Museum. Buddy Holly did crash in Iowa, so that's pretty sad. But there's the Grotto of the Redemption, which is pretty cool, so that's some form of redemption. I forgot to mention when I was really young, I went to the Amana Colonies and the Pella Historical Village. Iowa also has two major theme parks, Adventureland and the new Lost Island Park, which I really hope makes it long term. You know what? I'll give Iowa a C. Next up is what I think is an underrated state, Kansas. Kansas does have a lot to like. I have not been here yet. I have only traveled on train through the state. It is definitely lengthy. The state capital of Topeka is cool. They have an Evel Knievel museum. Wichita has a Museum of World Treasures. That's intriguing. One big positive for the state is being the boyhood home of General Dwight Eisenhower. There are some Wizard of Oz attractions I'd definitely like to check out. Plus there's lots of Wild West history, especially in Dodge City. There are also some truly unique attractions like the Cosmosphere, Stratica, and the small town of Lucas is one of the folk art capitals of America. So I am going to give Kansas a C here, though I am definitely considering putting it at a B. Now on to the bluegrass state of Kentucky. I have been to many different places in Kentucky over the years. I really like everywhere I've been to. Louisville has some great museums and historic homes. As is the case in Lexington, I have several videos here. The Horse Park is pretty neat. I also went to the state capital of Frankfurt just before I started filming videos. It's actually a really interesting city. I have also been to Bardstown and my old Kentucky home. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky. There's the Perryville battlefield. The Shaker Village of Pleasant Hill is a great place to visit. One spot that I will hopefully be visiting soon is Cave City at long last. The location of Mammoth Cave, the longest cave in the world, as well as other classic roadside attractions. There's lots of great state parks in Kentucky, plus it is the birthplace of KFC. So in my humble opinion, Kentucky is at least a B state. Let's head down in Louisiana next. I have never been to Louisiana, though I hope to change that soon. We have to talk about New Orleans, culturally a totally unique city in the US. There are some wonderful attractions here, such as the National World War II Museum and Mardi Gras World. But also the whole Mississippi River Valley seems fascinating with several different plantation museums. Baton Rouge is also kinda weird with the Huey Long history. Across the state there are some other interesting museums and historic locations. Bonnie and Clyde got killed in northern Louisiana. Poverty Point is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There are also some one-of-a-kind roadside attractions like the Abita Mystery House. Because of New Orleans, I would definitely consider putting Louisiana at a B, but I think I'll put it as a C. Although once I go there, I'll probably change my mind. Next up is another one-of-a-kind state, Maine. Maine is located way up north on the East Coast, but as you can see, it is quite desolate once you get beyond the coast. I have never been to Maine for the record, but Portland looks nice. Actually, this whole Route 1 corridor seems great. I definitely like to do that. To me, Acadia National Park must be the highlight of this state, but there's also Mount Katahdin. There's some weird stuff like the Desert of Maine. Also, General Joshua Chamberlain was from here. This is probably another state that once I'll go, I'll probably change my mind, but I'm gonna put Maine as a D state. Staying on the East Coast, now let's analyze the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Massachusetts is one of the most historically significant states, so there is a lot to see here. The only place I have been to in Massachusetts, or New England for that matter, is Boston and Cambridge. Here in Boston we have the Freedom Trail sites, some fantastic art museums like the Museum of Fine Arts and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The JFK Library is also here. Harvard is over in Cambridge. I like to explore that campus much more thoroughly. Then over here is where the American Revolution started, in Lexington and Concord. Of course, many of the Transcendentalists were also in Concord. I should also mention the Addams family, who are from Quincy. Down here is Plymouth. Cape Cod has some interesting attractions. The infamous city of Salem has some witch-related attractions. And there's other important sites like Lowell, Old Sturbridge Village. The Berkshires are also supposedly beautiful and has some important cultural sites. I'd especially like to go to the Norman Rockwell Museum. So Massachusetts is without a doubt an A-tier state. Let's take a look at Michigan next. Michigan is a big state divided by the Mitten and the Upper Peninsula. I have only been to the Detroit area, though I need to change that. The reason I have always gone to Detroit is because of the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village, one of the greatest attractions ever, so why don't we go over here and go ahead and put Michigan at an A, and I swear I will get the series out sometime. Despite all the crap it gets, Detroit does have some other great institutions, especially the Detroit Institute of Arts, honestly one of my favorite art museums in the US. Grand Rapids has some good stuff. I hear this garden is pretty good, and Gerald Ford is also from here. One place in Michigan I would love to visit is Mackinac Island and Mackinac City. The UP intrigues me. As you can see, I do have some things marked in here. There's also Isle Royale National Park, but there's a lot of coastline, so there's some interesting beaches, dunes like Sleeping Bear, also some wonderful roadside attractions like Bronner's Christmas Wonderland and Frankenmuth, and I have to give a shout out to Marvin's Marvelous Mechanical Museum in Farmington Hills. So look, I think A is a very fair place for Michigan. Staying up north, let's take a look at Minnesota. I have not been to Minnesota, sadly, but there's lots of lakes and whimsical attractions. Minneapolis-St. Paul has some interesting museums that are worth visiting, and I would definitely like to go to Princess Paisley Park. Hopefully they change their nonsensical photography rules. This Route 61 along Lake Superior looks pretty epic. Way up north there's Voyageurs National Park. I'd also like to see Itasca State Park where the Mississippi River starts. And of course I want to explore the Paul Bunyan heritage of Minnesota. Paul Bunyan land looks amazing. Still, I think Minnesota is kind of a mid-range state, so I'll put it in C. Alright, next up is one of the least favorite states, Mississippi. I have never been in Mississippi, and it's kind of sparse compared to other states. So there's the state capital of Jackson. There's also some Civil War and Civil Rights historic sites. I'd like to do the Highway 49 Blues Trail. Elvis Presley was born in Tupelo, so that's a big plus. And there's also Vicksburg. Vicksburg is the thing saving Mississippi from F tier, so I'm going to put it as a D. Now back to the mighty American West, let's check out Montana. Okay, Montana is a big state, and it's quite sparse. But really, I've only been to West Yellowstone to enter Yellowstone National Park. I have been to West Yellowstone like 10 times, but I have not been anywhere else in the entire state. Some cities have some interesting museums, like Bozeman and the Museum of the Rockies. C.M. Russell was in Great Falls. There's also a Lewis and Clark Center. Lots of Lewis and Clark history in Montana. Of course, we can't forget about General Custer and the Little Bighorn Battlefield. Plus, Glacier National Park looks fantastic. So I am going to give Montana a C. Although I do feel kind of bad putting Idaho and Montana in this category. Alright, now let's take a look at Nebraska. This is another big and desolate state. I think I've only been on a train through here. But the largest city, Omaha, looks alright. They have the Henry Dorley Zoo, which I hear is one of the best in America. Near the Lincoln Highway, which is what this red line through the map is, there are lots of classic attractions. I especially want to go to the Harold Wart Pioneer Village. There's also the Great Platte River Road Archway, and Buffalo Bill's Ranch in North Platte. Over in the western part of the state, it's my understanding that this Museum of the Fur Trade is actually amazing. There are also plenty of Oregon Trail sites, and Carhenge. So Nebraska does have some perks, however I'm still going to put it as a D. Okay, now on to the great state of Nevada. Besides Alaska, Nevada is probably the most desolate state. This whole big northern section basically has nothing. That's why they have the loneliest road through here. But Nevada does have Las Vegas. I freaking love Vegas. The Sin City is one of America's great tourist meccas. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful attractions through here. Las Vegas is the only place I've been to in Nevada, and I definitely want to return as it's always changing. And unfortunately, a lot of great old school features are being lost all the time. There's a lot of great natural sites in Nevada, from Red Rock Canyon, which I have been to the Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, which I have not been to. There's also the Valley of Fire and Great Basin National Park. Up north there are some more interesting towns like Reno and Virginia City, a classic Old West town. There are also some really bizarre places scattered throughout this empty space, like the Clown Motel and Area 51. While I kind of want to put it at a B because of Las Vegas, I think it is fair to put Nevada at a C because there isn't too much in the rest of the state. Let's go on back to New England with New Hampshire. This is a rather small state with no big cities or anything like that, but lots of natural beauty. There's the Franconia Notch and Mount Washington. There's even some roadside attractions along the Kankomagus Highway with Clark's Trading Post. I believe it's now called Clark's Bears. There's some more in the southern part of the state. President Franklin Pierce is from here. This is also supposed to be a pretty good art museum. This is another state I have not been to, but I think I'm going to put New Hampshire as a D tier. Okay, next up is New Jersey. I think most people would put New Jersey as a F tier, but let's analyze that. So I have not been to New Jersey besides the Newark airport, which is definitely one of my least favorite airports, but it has its own eccentricities. There is lots of Revolutionary War history throughout the state, from the Washington Crossing to the barracks at Trenton. I really want to go to this grounds for sculpture. There's Princeton University as well, but the highlight must be the boardwalk culture along the coast. I would love to go to Atlantic City. There are some other great seaside towns down here like Cape May and Wildwood. President Grover Cleveland and Thomas Edison were from New Jersey. This may be controversial, but I think New Jersey deserves a C. Now on to the land of enchantment, New Mexico. I spend a lot of time in New Mexico. It is one of my favorite states. It has some unrivaled natural majesty and totally unique cultural heritage. It is absolutely one of the most underrated states. Santa Fe has some fantastic attractions. I have many videos filmed here. The atomic bomb was also largely developed in Los Alamos. I recently did some videos here. It's in a beautiful area of the country with the Valles Caldera and Bandelier National Monuments. The larger city, Albuquerque, also has many unique features. Probably my two favorite attractions in the state are Tinkertown and Meow Wolf in Santa Fe. I really need to get up to Taos. And all throughout the state there is some incredible Native American history, especially with the Puebloan ruins of Chaco Canyon. Also up here in the northwest corner of the state, I would definitely recommend visiting the Aztec Museum and Pioneer Village. The southern part of the state gets pretty weird with Roswell, where the UFO crashed. White Sands National Park is one of the most unearthly landscapes on Earth. Also, I did recently visit Carlsbad Caverns National Park. That is the best cave I've ever been to. While I do want to give New Mexico an A, I already have a lot of A states, so I think we'll put it as B. Up next is a titan of the American states, New York. Okay, this clump here is the state of New York. There are a lot of different components of the state to look at. So yeah, there's the biggest city in America, New York City. There are just some tremendous historic landmarks and museums, the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island. The art museums are amazing, like MoMA, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Also, the American Museum of Natural History is one of my favorites. So New York City really needs no explanation. This is really the only place I've been to in the state of New York, and I really want to go back and film some new videos. Long Island also fascinates me. There's some great old mansions like Sagamore Hill, President Teddy Roosevelt's house. Another area of the country I really want to document is the Hudson River Valley. There are some glorious mansions and historic sites all along the valley, from New York City to the capital at Albany. There's West Point. Franklin Roosevelt lived at Hyde Park, so there's the house and presidential library. New York State actually has tons to do. I think without New York City, New York would probably still be an A state for me. I definitely want to go to Saratoga Springs and Lake George. The Adirondacks look fascinating. There are many fairly large cities like Syracuse and Rochester. Buffalo is actually pretty cool. And of course there's the American side of Niagara Falls. I have been briefly to Niagara Falls, Ontario, which is the better side, but still that's pretty cool. There are also some fantastic state parks around the Finger Lakes, like Letchworth and Watkins Glen. I could go on and on about New York, both the city and the state, so New York is definitely S tier. Okay, here's another state that I think is underrated, North Carolina. There are many wonderful places spread all throughout the state. Now, I've only been in the western part of the state at Asheville, North Carolina. I will have videos coming at some point. I did go to the Biltmore, as well as Chimney Rock State Park. This whole western area of North Carolina with the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Great Smoky Mountains is just beautiful. There is a lot more to explore with weird towns like Blowing Rock and Cherokee. All across the state there are towns I would like to explore. I always forget Charlotte is a really major city, and it looks like there's some stuff there. There's the University Triangle here, as well as the mighty coastline with the Outer Banks. Cape Hatteras and the Wright Brothers Memorial are definitely on the agenda. North Carolina is a really dynamic state, and I do think it is worthy of the A tier. Okay, now we'll look at a state that I don't think so highly of, North Dakota. Okay, there's nothing wrong with North Dakota, but it's way up here, and there isn't that much. It is definitely the lesser Dakota, but there's Fort Abraham Lincoln, the National Buffalo Museum. Theodore Roosevelt National Park is definitely the place I want to go to the most in North Dakota. There's also the Enchanted Highway, some Lewis and Clark history, but I am going to place North Dakota as an F tier. Let's look at a state that gets a lot of undeserved crap, Ohio. For the record, Ohio is awesome. I have been to different parts of the state many times. They have 3 major cities, known as the 3 Cs, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. I have spent the most time in the Cincinnati area. There are some great historic sites in the city, also places like the American Sign Museum. I have been to Columbus a few times. Actually, the earliest videos on this channel were filmed in Columbus. In Cleveland, believe it or not, has always been towards the top of my list. I have still never made it here, but there are lots of places I want to visit, like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Museum of Art here has a fantastic collection. Even the Christmas Story House is here. Dayton, the birthplace of aviation, also deserves a shout out. I definitely want to make more videos here. The National Museum of the United States Air Force is freaking awesome. Ohio is home to many presidents, like Ulysses S. Grant, Warren Harding, William McKinley, Rutherford Hayes, I've been to his house and museum, and James Garfield, among some others. There are also places of natural intrigue like Hocking Hills State Park, which is one of my favorite state parks. They also have the Cuyahoga Valley National Park and the Put-in Bay. And there are just lots of unusual attractions all across the state, even amusement parks like Kings Island and Cedar Point. So in my mind, Ohio is beyond a shadow of a doubt an A-tier state. Okay, let's head on down to Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma twice in 2020, so that's all the experience I have had. I've done this Route 66 corridor here, and even though it's not on this map, I went to Chickasha, which has the best Christmas attraction I've ever been to, maybe besides the Clifton Mill in Ohio. Oklahoma City has a lot of interesting museums, like the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, and the Museum of Osteology. Tulsa, from my understanding, has 2 great art museums. I have been down to the southern part of the state to visit the Wichita Mountains National Wildlife Refuge, which is quite the place. I do have some videos on that if you're interested. Will Rogers is also from Oklahoma, so Oklahoma is pretty nice, and fingers crossed they'll get a massive theme park, American Heartland, opening sometime in a few years. So for now, I am going to put Oklahoma at the sea level. Let's take a look at a state in a region that I have never been to, Oregon. That's right, I've never been to the huge Pacific Northwest states. I've actually never been in this whole region at all. While I don't often hear a lot of nice things about Portland, there are some beautiful gardens and parks. I really want to do the Columbia River Highway. Also, the Enchanted Forest looks awesome. The whole Oregon coast must be majestic. I would definitely like to see Newport and Astoria. Oregon is also home to Crater Lake National Park. Obviously, there's some Oregon Trail history. Also, the Spruce Goose is here. Oregon is a worthy B-tier state. Next, let's take a look at Pennsylvania, which I think is one of the greatest states in the Union. So as you can see, Pennsylvania is looking pretty thick there. I have not been to Pennsylvania in nearly a decade. When I was much younger, I went to Philadelphia, and I personally planned my first ever road trip to Hershey, Gettysburg, and Falling Water along with Fort Necessity. Philadelphia is one of the most historic cities in the nation, with all the sites related to Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. There are also top-notch museums like the Franklin Institute, the Barnes Foundation, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Another quite unique city is Pittsburgh, with all the Carnegie-related museums. So the battlefield at Gettysburg and the town itself is one of my favorite places I have ever visited. Just a fascinating place with some great museums in town. Gosh, there is so much history all across Pennsylvania. This whole stretch of the Lincoln Highway, and especially the Dutch country, is fantastic. Out of all the state capitol buildings I've been to, the one in Harrisburg is probably my favorite. There are many national park sites like Valley Forge. As I mentioned, Fort Necessity is interesting. Plus there's Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece, Falling Water. Pennsylvania is quite unique because there are a lot of old school trolley parks, historic amusement parks like Lakemont and Altoona. Knoebels is one of the ones I want to go to the most. There's also Kennywood near Pittsburgh. Pennsylvania is absolutely S tier. There is a lot I want to cover there on this channel. Since we just took a look at one of the biggest East Coast states, let's take a look at the smallest state in the entire country, Rhode Island. So yeah, Rhode Island is quite small. Going back to colonial times, there's a heritage of religious tolerance with Roger Williams. I have not been to Rhode Island, but my first stop would be Newport with some fantastic Gilded Age mansions. The state capital of Providence has some points of interest. There's the Slater Mill, that's an important Industrial Revolution site. But because Rhode Island is really tiny, it gets an F. Here's another southern state that I have not been to, South Carolina. So South Carolina is nice. The city of Charleston has long been a priority for me. I'm definitely considering going here sometime soon. There are many historic plantations, Patriots Point looks awesome, and you gotta go see Fort Sumter. The state capital of Columbia also has a few points of interest. South Carolina has a few national park sites like Congaree National Park, so there's lots of swamps here. This area around Myrtle Beach is also cool. Myrtle Beach itself has lots of weird attractions. There's some Revolutionary War history and some roadside attractions like the UFO Welcome Center. And south of the border, even though it's definitely carried by Charleston, South Carolina is solid, so I'll put it as a B state. Now that I have properly insulted North Dakota, let's look at the better Dakota, South Dakota. I have not really been to South Dakota. I went here when I was really young, and apparently my interest in presidents started by a visit to Mount Rushmore. So in much of the state there isn't too much. The I-90 corridor is neat, but the undoubted highlight is the Black Hills. America's most colossal monuments, Mount Rushmore and the Crazy Horse Memorial, are located here. There's also Custer State Park, Wind Cave National Park, and all sorts of weird roadside attractions around Rapid City. Can't forget the Wild West town of Deadwood. As mentioned, the I-90 area is interesting with Badlands National Park, the legendary Wall Drug Store, There are many wonderful things about South Dakota, but I think it's fair to put it at the sea level. So this list was not quite alphabetical. We have Missouri now. I have been in Missouri a little bit, and it was anything but miserable. I went to Mark Twain's hometown on the Mississippi River, Hannibal, Missouri, and also made the pilgrimage out to Marceline, which is Walt Disney's hometown. Missouri has two awesome cities. First off, St. Louis, the gateway to the west. Of course, there's the Gateway Arch. I really want to go to the City Museum, plus Forest Park, which has some major museums. The other major city in Missouri is Kansas City, which has been at the top of my list for a while. I definitely want to see the National World War I Museum. President Harry Truman is from nearby Independence, which is quite the historic city. Missouri has an entertaining stretch of Route 66. And down south in the Ozarks is the tourist mecca of Branson. I think a few other worthy inclusions are the Wonders of Wildlife National Museum and Aquarium in Springfield, plus north of Kansas City, St. Joseph is interesting. So I know many will not agree with my decision here, but I think Missouri is an A state. Next up is a state that's among my favorites, Tennessee. I have been to Tennessee several times now, but there's still a lot more to do. And there's some great musical heritage. I guess we'll start in Nashville. Now I have actually not been to Nashville itself. I have only been to Andrew Jackson's home, the Hermitage. But of course there are many country music sites to visit. Another amazing city with musical history is Memphis. I did go to Memphis fairly recently with the exclusive purpose of visiting Graceland. Seeing Elvis's house was a life highlight, but there is plenty more to do here in Memphis. Another city I have been to is Chattanooga, specifically to visit Lookout Mountain and Ruby Falls, the Incline Railway, the battlefield. But my favorite place I have been to in Tennessee is Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg. There are some awesome and zany attractions in Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg. I will have new videos coming sometime in the future. This is of course the gateway to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. There are many other natural wonders throughout Tennessee and other historic sites. The Museum of Appalachia in Clinton is among my favorites. Andrew Johnson and James K. Polk are also from Tennessee, and there are many Civil War sites like Shiloh. Tennessee could not possibly be placed below the A tier. Texas is so big that I have to zoom all the way out. My experience in Texas is largely limited to Route 66 through the Panhandle. Amarillo is home to the Cadillac Ranch, and one of my favorite restaurants, the Big Texan. Paladero Canyon is also pretty awesome. I have also been down to the western part of the state at Guadalupe Mountains National Park, and I was briefly in El Paso, but I have not been anywhere in all of this. So Dallas and Fort Worth are some of the cities I want to visit the most in the entire country. I especially want to see the JFK assassination sites, but there are many other great museums in the DFW area, like the George W. Bush Presidential Library. Fort Worth actually has some good art museums like the Kimball. The state capital of Texas unsurprisingly has the largest state capitol building, as well as the LBJ Presidential Library. San Antonio is a wonderful historic city, home to the Alamo and much more. They also have another massive city, Houston. There are many sites related to the Texan War for Independence, like the San Jacinto Monument. Oh yeah, there's also Space Center Houston, and Galveston Island. Even the southern part of the state is interesting with Big Bend National Park, and there are just so many places across the state, from the National Museum of the Pacific War to George H.W. Bush's Presidential Library. The great state of Texas is undoubtedly S tier. Okay, let's take a look at another epic western state, Utah. So I have been across Utah several times over the years. Actually, one of my favorite cities is Salt Lake City. There's the Temple Square, and I really like the This Is the Place Heritage Park. Antelope Island State Park on the Great Salt Lake is really cool. And geologically, Utah is perhaps the most fascinating state. I haven't been over to the Bonneville Salt Flats yet. But the southern part of the state is home to some of the greatest national parks in the country. There's the Mighty Five, Arches, Canyonlands, Zion, Bryce Canyon, and the only one I haven't been to, Capitol Reef. There are many other great natural wonders like Cedar Breaks, the Coral Pink Sand Dunes, Natural Bridges National Monument, and Monument Valley, which is one of my favorite places in the American West. Also, there's lots of dinosaurs in this part of the country, with old dino parks and dinosaur national monuments. Because of all that, Utah is definitely B tier.
The next state is quite different but has a lot of natural beauty too, Vermont. I have not been to the small New England state of Vermont yet, but I hear Burlington is nice. Also, the Shelburne Museum is supposedly pretty great. Yeah, there's lots of hidden gems spread throughout Vermont. President Calvin Coolidge is from Vermont. Also, Robert Lincoln lived in Manchester. I'd like to see that house. And there's lots of Revolutionary War history, especially at Bennington. But just like its similar neighbor, New Hampshire, Vermont is a D state. I think few states are more significant than Virginia. Virginia has history galore. There is so much I want to do here. My experience has been restricted to the Washington, D.C. area, but Virginia is technically home to Arlington National Cemetery, and I've also been to the Udvar-Hazy Center of the National Air and Space Museum. Freaking fantastic. But that's pretty much all I've been to. Clearly there is a lot more. The state capital of Richmond has plenty of historic sites to visit, including many related to the Civil War. This area is of tremendous importance with Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown. I'd also really like to go to Norfolk and the MacArthur Memorial. Virginia Beach is also cool. Virginia is home to the most presidents, and there are many homes you can visit, like George Washington's Mount Vernon. Oh yeah, I did go there a long time ago. There's Thomas Jefferson's Monticello in Charlottesville, James Monroe's Highlands, James Madison's Montpelier. William Henry Harrison was born at Berkeley Plantation. There's John Tyler's Sherwood Forest, and the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library in Staunton. Also, Virginia is basically a big Civil War battlefield. There's Manassas, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness, Petersburg, and the surrender site at Appomattox. The western part of the state is fascinating, with the Blue Ridge Parkway, Shenandoah National Park. Some of America's greatest caves are in Virginia, like Luray Caverns. Natural Bridge State Park is also great. And the state is home to some old school attractions, like Mark Klein's Dinosaur Kingdom 2. Virginia is just plain awesome, and is undoubtedly S tier. Okay, let's head back over to the West Coast to analyze Washington. I have not been to Washington State. First things first, there is a lot in Seattle. Some highlights include the Space Needle and Mopop. The city of Tacoma is also intriguing. I definitely want to see the LeMay collection. There are many wonderful natural locations across the state, like Mount Rainier National Park, North Cascades National Park, which is little known. Oh, and I definitely want to visit the Grand Coulee Dam. The coastline is home to some of the state's greatest gems, like Marsh's Free Museum, home of Jake the Alligator Man, and Olympic National Park. That's one of the national parks I want to visit the most. And there's also the San Juan Islands. So I feel like Washington is a B state, although once I thoroughly visit the state, I may consider putting it in the A category. Alright, there's just a few more to go now. Now let's take a look at West Virginia. So West Virginia has an odd conglomeration of places. It has a rather remote and mountainous terrain. So I've been to a few places in West Virginia. This town, Moundsville, is interesting with the West Virginia Penitentiary. And there's also this Palace of Gold in New Vrindaban, a Hare Krishna compound, which is a fascinating place. I have a video on that if you're interested. I have also been down here to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is home to the Mothman. Also, Billy Bob's Wonderland is in West Virginia. This is by far my most popular video. And yes, for those of you wondering, the next time I can pass through this area, I will definitely be stopping there to make another video. This state has some wonderful parks like the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve. I hear the whitewater rafting on some of these rivers is pretty intense, so I'll look into that sometime. West Virginia also has several caves and the Greenbrier resorts. And way up here in the corner is Harper's Ferry, where John Brown raided the Federal Arsenal. While there are some wonderful places along the country roads of West Virginia, I am going to have to put it in the D category. Now to finish off the Midwest, let's take a look at Wisconsin. I have been to Wisconsin a couple of times. There is more than just cheese up here. I was briefly in Milwaukee on my 18th birthday. I really like the Milwaukee Art Museum and the Public Museum. I know they're changing locations and I really hope they keep some of their displays intact. I am extremely nervous about this, as this museum is perfection. I have also been over to the state capitol at Madison. Now this area west of Madison is really interesting. One highlight is the tourist mecca of Wisconsin Dells. There's also Circus World Museum, which is a lot of fun. Frank Lloyd Wright lived here at Taliesin. And Wisconsin is home to one of my favorite attractions of all time, the House on the Rock. I consider putting Wisconsin at A because of this place. The entire state of Wisconsin has a lot of really weird roadside attractions, and there's a lot I haven't been to. Door County up here is beautiful, and the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore looks great. While Wisconsin is home to one of my absolute favorite attractions, I think Wisconsin is a B-tier state. And finally, we have made it to state number 50, Wyoming. I definitely have a soft spot for Wyoming. I spent a lot of time in this state, primarily over here in the Jackson Hole and Yellowstone region. Until a few years ago, I was in the Jackson area every year. Grand Teton National Park is one of my favorite places on Earth, as is one of the greatest landscapes in the world, Yellowstone National Park. I have videos on all this if you're interested. Another one of my favorite cities that I would really like to go back to and film is Cody, Wyoming, home of Buffalo Bill. The Buffalo Bill Center of the West is among the best museums I have been to, but I haven't really been in the eastern part of the state at all. The state capital of Cheyenne looks nice. There's also lots of Oregon Trail history through Wyoming, and there's Devil's Tower National Monument. Also, Wyoming is the original home of the jackalope, so that's pretty significant to me. So my final verdict is that Wyoming is a B-tier state.
So there you go. That is my ranking of the United States. Again, I do hope to thoroughly visit all of these states in the future, so my opinions may change over time. I will admit I do think I was a little biased towards these states I have been to and spent more time in. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any significant agreements or disagreements with me, then feel free to leave those in the comments section. Also, I will be linking my map in the description, so you can use that as a travel resource and explore on that if you want. I currently have hundreds of videos featuring all sorts of attractions in the United States, so please take a look at any of that. I do have playlists for every single state, as well as some others by genre. Also, I don't usually mention this, but I do have a Patreon page. That's a site where you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month to help me travel and produce these videos. The individuals who have joined on there have helped me a lot over the years. Plus, you can get access to some exclusive content. One thing I just started sharing every month was a new video that I just completed that will not be released publicly on my channel for several months. So you get to see what I'm currently working on and see it way before everyone else. You can check the link in the description. Besides that, anyone can help out a lot to grow this channel by simply watching the videos. Also, hitting the like button and leaving a comment does boost it in the algorithm, so if you want to do that, I'd really appreciate it. So here on Hoosier Tours, we are going to keep exploring America. I hope I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.